to these sounds. Plant down and lotus in a tempted ground. Knowing if I fail to lift the veil, I'm hellbound. Journey through the fate of all the hate I found. Done laying out the layman's for these lames, big clowns. We can still throw down pound for pound if you choose to drag my name through the mud with no bounds. Scars go deep, but the passion can shift. Trying to find a balance between anger and bliss. Searching for my purpose when success is a myth. I thought I knew the gist of the plot, but it came with a twist. Had it all mapped out, but none of the pieces fit. Abandonment issues got me doing the split. Realizing I didn't really need what I wish. Got sick of getting tricked into giving the devil a kiss. Welcome to the side of hell. They got me under a spell. Story to tell as soon as I break out of this shell. Welcome to the side of hell.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Portal to the Paranormal Thriller podcast. I hope everyone's having a great day or great evening wherever you are in the world. As always, thank you for joining us. We have a great guest on tonight. Just been having a great chat with him in the background there. Just a bit of a bio. So we are bringing on Neil Storey. He is an award-winning historian and author who specialises in the impact of war on British society in the first half of the 20th century. He has written over 40 books now. And he has been a guest historian on factual programs like Who Do You Think You Are? The Buildings That Fought Hitler. And he's also stepped into the paranormal world and been a historian on Celebrity My House is Haunted, Help My House is Haunted. And he's also been on Most Haunted as well. So let's bring on Neil Storey. Hey, Neil, how you doing?
Hello, Nando, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for taking the time out, because I know you've had a bit going on. Thank you for taking the time to come on. Just want to give a few shout outs. So we got Matt Barron, paranormal consultant. Thank you for joining. We have Kim Nolan. Hey,
you
guys.
Beautiful lady.
A couple of kisses there, bless her. So as always, guys, we want you guys to get involved. So if you have any questions throughout the show for Neil, please chuck them in the comments and we will get them asked. But I'm going to kick this off, Neil. You've with what I've researched, you have grown up in a rich history of, in your family with his history. Growing up, your grandfather, I know he was born in 1909. He saw the First World War, and then he served in the Second World War. But you've mentioned about how stories were told. Can you give us a bit of a background about how this all got started for you?
When I think about it now, my granddad was an Edwardian. It's weird to think that link, isn't it? His parents were Victorians. But if we all think about it, if you're that kind of magical age, if you're born in the 70s, it's common to a lot of us,
Yeah.
I grew up in Norfolk, and Norfolk always was an agricultural county. Lots of good working people, a history of agricultural unions banding together, working together to get through some pretty tough times, but also some great times, some festivals, some music, the language, the culture. It's a wonderful county. And I had a wonderful childhood. Thanks to, I grew up a lot with my grandparents and their friends. Granny had, there were 6 or 7 brothers and sisters still alive at that time. Granddad had quite a lot of sisters as well. So yeah, they were from an older generation, but they kind of give you that old-fashioned values, which I don't think are a bad thing. And the stories that would be told, it was just great. Just reminisce. They had a lot of time to reminisce. They were pretty much retired when I knew a lot of my grandparents and their family. And they would talk of working with horses, working on the land, and progressions. When after the war, when there wasn't a lot of work around, my granddad came home and he swept the roads for a little while. And that's what you did. And then the snows came down in 1947. And they needed, and these were deep snows across East Anglia, and I think a lot of across Great Britain. And lots of people remember my dear old granddad and his team of workmen clearing. Oh, I remember your granddad cleared my mother's front drive, and they'd get shopping for the locals. They remembered that. But what they forget is that granddad's work team were a lot of German ex-prisoners of war. And if they worked in Britain, they could earn the right to stay here. And why did they put my granddad in charge of them? Well, my granddad had fought in the Far East. So they said, well, George, you've got no gripe with the Germans. They'll put you in charge of them. He was a countryman. And, you found that no matter what colour people tend to be in East Anglia, it's just who you are that matters. If you're a good person, that doesn't really matter what your colour is or where you're from. If you will work hard and must mess in with everybody else and be a good person, just be decent. In those days, a lot of people smoked. Share your fags, boy. Share what you got. And I know that might people say, well, that's rosy tinted spectacles. Well, that might be a little bit of the nostalgia that I heard. But the point is, if people didn't get on during wartime and afterwards, well, what a blooming awful state we would all be in if people just didn't rub along and get along nicely, in the main. Most people just want a quiet life, don't you? And have a few laughs along the way, a few beers,
Definitely.
It's all right.
Just enjoy the time that we have here and not worry about all the aggro, just leave it as it is.
And if you're having a beer or you're sharing a cup of tea, it's always good to have a story to tell. And they don't want to hear the same one all the time. So there were some stories were tall, some stories were, things they could remember. Other stories might be a little bit ghostly.
Well, we'll definitely step into that as well. So growing up, you come from a lot of history. What was your start in being a historian? Do you remember what the kind of first things that you started researching and what you started doing first?
Yeah. What I did when you're at school, if you've got good history teachers, they'll get you to talk to your grandparents and relatives. They might do a project on the town in the past. They might do a project on World War I, because when I was a boy, there were still quite a lot of First World War veterans still around, or World War II, and go and talk to them and research their story. And it really opened a door for me that I thought, well, these guys and ladies too, lasses, they're brilliant stories, even if they're kids and they are, or grown-ups, they're in the military, if they're on the home front doing their bit, they're often just shrug. Oh, I just did it. I just drove ambulances in the Blitz in World War II. But for them, it was their generation. They often didn't see there was anything special in it at all, because everybody else to them was doing the same thing to help out. But I thought these are brilliant stories. Those that had served in both World Wars, that they'd say, oh, only the heroes got the medals. If you say, well, you were a hero for what you did, no, I just helped my mates, I did my bit, and that was it. But these stories are extraordinary, and you put yourself into their shoes. For example, my granny was an ambulance driver in World War II in Norfolk. Now, you might think Norfolk's really quiet. Well, it's surrounded by air bases, crashes, the Liberator bombers that are coming down. And she was part of an ambulance crew that would have to go out and attend. They were sometimes first on the scene. And it was horrific what she saw. And she was about 15 miles from Norwich in a town called North Walsham. And if you saw the city glowing, and Norwich was bombed several times in World War II, if you saw the city glowing, you knew it wouldn't be long before the phone would jangle, and you'd be off on the ambulance, and you wouldn't be sitting at home thinking, God, thank God I'm not in that. You'd be driving towards the fire. And I just think for a young woman on her own, granddad's away at war. She's got a brother missing in action. She's got other brothers doing their bit too. That was a hell of a thing to do, to drive towards those fires and do your bit. And, for those on the home front, for those in the military services, there really wasn't any counselling for them. The phrase was very much pull yourself together. But the legacies that I saw in a lot of these veterans, their feelings, their emotions were just as raw sometimes, which is why they often wouldn't talk about it. They boxed it away.
Yeah.
But they'd want to tell it once. So if they're going to tell it once, they'd often tell it to me. And
Wow.
I consider that not just history, that's a privilege.
And with the books relating to the war that you've written, do you get a lot of your inspiration from those people that you've spoken to? Is there an element that you sort of relay what they've gone through in your books to keep
Yes,
that part of their history alive as well?
Absolutely right. The interviews that took place, they're verbatim, and they're reproduced in the books, or the stories that they told me are developed in the books to show a bigger picture. So I'll be inspired to think of some of the lesser known incidents. You tell a big story, but illustrate it with the experiences of those whose voices you don't normally hear. So you can get the general history in many, many books, but I want to tell the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And that to me is history because it's personal. And also digging around in the archives to see memoirs and people that some really good interviews given at the time of World War II, after air raids, or the men that were writing back home. Their letters would often be reproduced in the press. And you think, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty authentic. That's fresh. It's not a memory from years ago. So it's a real blend of, because often with the passage of time, and it can happen to all of us, memories blur and they get amalgamated. So I want to get the original story and the timeline, get that right, and then get the stories to illustrate it right from those who were actually there that I interviewed, and find photographs to help tell those stories. Because some people say, oh no, they never wore that in their uniform. This didn't happen in this town. Well, yes, it was bombed. It was bombed on this date. And here is a photograph of the high street with all the glass blown out. Bomb damage, you know?
It's such a great, to be able to actually speak to people that have actually been part of it, because, you're getting the true history from them, which, you can relay back in your book. And in a way, your books are keeping that history going. You were saying in the background, we're touching it back, that the way you want to bring the history forward, you don't want to be, the boring part, you've got a real passion and it comes through really well. How do you get people to, how do you captivate your audience, shall I say? Because you want to bring fun to it. How do you, when you're doing your speaks and things like that, what do you bring and how do you do your storytelling?
Well, I look at it this way. Number one, be yourself. Don't be a character, be you. And if you've got it in you to stand in front of people and tell a story, for God's sake, make it interesting. Make it a good one, and don't be afraid that if something in some of the worst situations you could ever possibly imagine, there will be humor found. Because if you think of the infantrymen in combat in World War II, sometimes the dry humor that those guys had, you've got to find something, even in the worst situations. Otherwise, you will go bonkers, and the dry wit of everybody that's been in extreme situations is extraordinary. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. It is extraordinary. It's extreme. It's often really funny. It's very poignant. So funny it will make you cry, but it's funny. And it gets you through. So I think if you time it, tell the story straight. Tell them if somebody's told you a story, you've interviewed them, and you've laughed, you've enjoyed the way they've told that story, then try and recapture that in the way you tell it. If it's got, deliver it the same way. You don't need to jazz it up or mess around too much with it. Tell it straight. You don't need to embroider it because these stories are so good. Just tell it. Just tell it the way they told it. Always name
Brilliant.
it. You know, when I tell a story, if it's by a certain person, I mean, I knew Richard Davis. He was the coxswain of the Cromer lifeboat. Told me some great stories, some lovely ghost stories as well. I'll always say, this was told to me by, and I'll say Richard Davis. There'll be people in the audience that knew him, and you tell it the way he told it, and they'll recognize it. And that's lovely. And even if you don't know that person, they will enjoy the storytelling. And so if you've been doing that a lot of years, I'd hate to bore people. I hope to bring it alive, make it interesting, but you don't need to embroider it. Just tell it straight so that whatever you got, somebody said, Neil, I don't believe that. Well, it's in this book, it's in this newspaper article, and this person remembers it. They are your verbal footnotes. Here is your photograph. Tell the truth, tell it straight, you know. And if you've got the chance, never force humor, never force it. It'll come, and
Just let it
it'll
naturally
be there.
flow.
In fact, enjoy it. Do you know, if you're giving a talk to a public audience, I mean, if I'm speaking for an academic audience, and I've got to teach some students that, you know, they're at university, that you can, you know, it's a Monday morning, they've had a few drinks over the weekend, and you're going to have to defibrillate them. And you can either look a really tragic git trying to tell a funny story, or you can tell something that will actually wake them up and make them laugh. So see where it goes. Because I tell you what, if you're just droning on, students or no one's going to listen. They're not going to enjoy it. They're not going to engage with it. Try and capture that imagination. Fire them up to want to come and do that research and produce the essays that gives them the best grades. Or people say to me, I've been to your talk, I'm going to be looking this up on the internet. There you go. That's great. That's job done. You're taking something away. People go away. One of the greatest feelings, I came out from a talk not so long ago, and I was hearing people buzzing. They were talking about what they had heard, the memories that had brought back to them. That's job done. That's the job done. Get people thinking, you know? That's what that was.
Brilliant. Just a minute. So we've got Jenny Sanyasi from Ireland.
Hello, Jenny.
She says hello. Sarah's just popped a little message in there saying, fantastic answer, brilliant. I get lost in your imagination, Neil. So
bless your heart, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And Kim, what doesn't he bring? He is amazing. He draws you in and keeps you in. He is warm, friendly, and entertaining. So
Kim is such a kind soul as well in this world. You're a beautiful person, Kim. Love you lots, darling.
So, as I mentioned earlier on, you've been an author of over 40 books now. Some of them I've taken a picture of some of the books that you've done. That's just a few. Just a few of your books. Now, you know, you've written about, you know, the history is a big part of it. But I don't know if you would answer this, but is there a particular book that you've done that stands out to be your favorite, and why?
That's a naughty one. That officially, as a historian, the book that I'm most proud of as a historian is the history of my great grandfather's battalion in World War I. It's called The King's Men, and it's the story of the men of the 5th of the Norfolk Territorial Battalions in World War I, which includes the 5th Battalion. It included the King's Company. It was known as the King's Company, the Sandringhams, and there's this legend to it that they disappeared in Gallipoli in a cloud, and it's one of those frustrating stories that just won't go away. And I thought, let's tell it straight. They didn't all disappear. If they had, my great granddad would have gone with them. You know, boom. It was a terrible action in August 1915, and an awful lot of men lost their lives, and a lot of men were wounded as well. So the battalion wasn't wiped out, but it was badly knocked around, and a lot of men didn't come home, or they're badly injured. So that meant an awful lot to me. And I know, as a Norfolk man, I know so many of those families, because in World War I, this is on my granny's side, Grandad Griffin, he was 5th Norfolks. In World War II, my great uncle, my granny's brother Oswald, was in the 5th Battalion again, and they went to Singapore, and he was posted missing. But they never knew exactly what happened to him until I did some research. It's believed we know he went to Alexandra Hospital, but a lot of men were killed in the hospital there in a terrible action in 1942. So the 5th Battalion means a lot to me. I knew a lot of Far Eastern prisoners of war. They were lovely old boys. So I wrote a book on the Territorials, the 5th Norfolks. It means a lot, an awful lot to me. So that's, as a historian, that's probably one of the ones I'm most proud of. My books on espionage, the recent ones, telling the stories of spies, saboteurs, collaborators in Britain. That's new because the records are very, very new. That I'm very proud of because it's absolutely groundbreaking. But personally, what really motivates me? I absolutely adore the man, the works, the time period of Bram Stoker.
I know that's one that's very close to your heart, that one. And we're going to touch on that because that's one of your newest books as well, isn't it? Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula.
That's coming out very soon. That'll be later this year. So you're hot off the press, man. That's not hit the shelves yet.
But, are we allowed to touch into that a little bit?
Of course you can.
You've done a lot of research based on this book. I know that you did. You even went to Whitby with Dave Schreider. Tell us a little bit about the book and how that got started for you and what got you so passionate about Bram Stoker.
What's an interesting thing is that now I was born in 1972. I'm 51 this year, and when you start growing up, you become conscious of a few things. One of the things that's been in my mind for just about as long as I can remember is Dracula, because when I was a kid at school, and I was at primary school, and I walked past cinemas, and there'd be posters for Hammer horror films. And I'll tell you what, I'll clean this up because this is for family audiences. They really scared me. And you grown-ups know what I wanted to say there. They really scared me when I was a kid. And even if I'd wanted, I wouldn't dare go and see a Hammer horror with Dracula, taste the blood of Dracula, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, all this kind of stuff. Wouldn't dare go, even if I would dare. I wasn't old enough because in those days it was X certificate. There's no way you'd get in. But if I walked into my local newsagents, I could buy some Topps bubblegum cards for about, 3 or 4p. And then get this stick of very dry, powdery bubblegum that's blooming awful. And you get three. They're like little bubblegum cards, maybe on cardboard. Lurid pictures of blood-soaked scenes from the film Dracula AD 1972, which is the year I was born. And other, Frankenstein and all sorts of other ones from Hammer. But these pictures were so frightening. I frightened myself. I was getting nightmares. I had to give them to my mum. So I've known Drac all my life. And when you get a bit older, you get braver. So when they started showing them on TV, the Hammer horrors, when I was, about 10, 11, 12 years old, I'd be allowed. If it wasn't a school night, you could stay up and watch it. And of course, they knew it's on at 10 o'clock. And they knew that I wouldn't get through 5 blooming minutes. I wouldn't get the titles going on, start seeing the man, the Christopher Lee, I'm gone. And the ironic thing is that now, all these years, I've got a bit of nostalgia going on. So I've bought me Topps bubblegum cards. Great, I can be a big boy. I can cope with those now. got my Hammer annuals, Scream magazine again. Feeling good. So I've got granddaughters now. So I thought, what about my 10-year-old granddaughter? What does little Ivy think of these cards? So I had a word with my boy, with my son. I didn't want to traumatise her. I said, can I show it? Yeah, of course you can, Dad. What do you reckon of these, Ivy? Have a look at the cards. We showed them to friends, and they've got daughters. One's 8 and one's 11. And we were all a bit worried, have we done the right thing? But the kids just looked at him and thought, it's just a funny man in a funny outfit. It's just, it's nothing. These are kids. I was scared witless. It's nothing to them now. It's absolutely, so Lord, I mean, we all protect and love our children. Lord knows how they see or whatever it is, but I'm going to sound a right granddad now. It's a different world, Nando.
It is a very different world. We say that a lot with the paranormal. Back in the day, a lot of people didn't really talk about it, but now they do. But yeah, so you've shown your granddaughters the Dracula cards, and where did it lead on from there?
Yeah. Well, I mean that was it was all part of this research for the book years ago, about 2012. That would be the 100th anniversary of Bram Stoker's death, and I really wanted to bring something new to the table. A few years before that, about the early 2000s, I'd realised, thanks to my dear friend Stuart P. Evans, who had discovered a letter. Stuart P. Evans had found a letter which named a new suspect for Jack the Ripper. And there was a wonderful Channel 4 documentary presented by David Jessel that explored this new suspect. The suspect was named by Chief Superintendent Littlechild of the Special Branch. So this was an unknown suspect, but a very, very good person to, point the finger. He was the only one to have been Littlechild to be in position before, during, and after the Ripper crimes. So he's the man. Special Branch, that's nation security stuff. You don't mess around with those fellas. So to name that suspect, to see the documentary, and in the documentary, they had a lady called Vivian Allen talking about Tumblety having a relationship, probably a gay relationship, with Thomas Henry Hall Caine. Now, that was when Hall Caine was on his way up as an author. Now, most people will probably not have heard of Hall Caine, but he was the first man to sell 1 million books in the English language. In the Victorian age, Hall Caine was the man. Every house would have had a book on the shelf, but his books, they haven't translated with time for modern audiences. They're often quite Christian. They're kind of chocolate boxy love triangles, really. So most literary circles have never heard of Hall Caine. But I knew that Hall Caine was a really good friend of Bram Stoker. So in the early 2000s, the Hall Caine archive had not been released. They were still it was still being catalogued. I had to wait about 10 years. So it had been about 2010, 2011, and I'd regularly contacted the curator, the Isle of Man archives, where they said, "How are you getting on?" And I got to know Wendy Thurkettle quite well, and she said, "Neil, we're down to the last box." I said, "Well, I've got my book coming up. I need to get on." She said, "Come on over." And we went through the last box together, the last box of correspondence. And in total, I mean, there were over 40 letters between Francis Tumblety to Hall Caine. And when I published it, I transcribed all of these letters. It is the greatest concentration, greatest collection of letters from any contemporary Jack the Ripper suspect ever to be published. But then, of course, when I was going through that archive, I found all these Bram Stoker letters. Absolutely incredible. 40, 50, 60 more of them. So I thought one day that will be another book. And so in the 10 years since Dracula Secrets, which looked at the connection with Dracula and the Jack the Ripper crimes and the inspirations for Bram Stoker, I've developed this biography, and I've got quite a nice collection of original letters and first editions of Bram. The Bram Stoker estate, Dacre Stoker, has always been absolutely wonderful and very, very helpful. The Stoker historians that I knew along the way, we've lost a few of them now, very, very sadly. People like Robert 18 Bysang, Richard Dolby, Leslie Shepherd over in Ireland. Sadly, they've gone. So in many ways, the book I was hoping to write with these guys, the torch kind of fell to me, so that it's quite a heavy weight on my shoulders to produce this book. But I hope my new biography of Bram Stoker will bring a lot to the table, a lot of new material, things people will have not seen before, pictures people haven't seen before, and stories of the man. So I hope it's just a great enjoyment of the life of Bram, and a way to show, look, this is why he's not just Dracula. There's things like Lair of the White Worm, Jewel of the Seven Stars, which is one of the first ever reanimated mummy stories. He was good. He was a good writer. But yeah, he nailed it with Dracula.
Yeah. And, on the theme with the Dracula, Sarah's just put, Dracula just rolls off the tongue. How did Bram Stoker think of the name, and how did the connection of Vlad the Impaler, is that right, the Blood Prince, come to play in the book on Whitby influence?
Yeah, well, thank you, Sarah, for that. That's a great question. What happened was Bram Stoker, his friend George du Maurier. Now, George du Maurier was a good artist, good writer, playwright. He was the man that created a play called Trilby. Now, Trilby is about this young girl off the streets, really, that falls under the spell of a mesmerist. And the trouble was, this pretty young girl, he could make her a great singer, but he would have his wicked way with her. He had power over the mind. He did that, and that fascinated Bram. And that's why you see in the Dracula story, this and other stories by Bram, the power of the mind. So du Maurier was a pal of Bram's, and he was like having a little break up in Whitby, and he'd suggested, why don't you come up to Whitby with your family too? And so Bram went ahead of his family. They were staying in the Royal Crescent, and he's just on his own. And I suspect, although I haven't found the letter to prove it, I suspect he met Molly to have a yarn with him and have a few drinks. And But what we know for sure is that Bram stood on the West Cliff, looking across to the east, and he wrote the most wonderful eulogic view of the River Esk in his diary, which becomes the voice of Mina Harker in his book. It absolutely inspired him. But I like to think it was rather a wet day one day, and when Bram was in there, and Bram had this idea for a book on a vampire of sorts for many, many years. He had loved Through a Glass Darkly, which is Sheridan Le Fanu, who was actually, he went to the same university as Bram a few years before, Trinity in Dublin. And Sheridan Le Fanu actually created the first ever lesbian vampire story, which is Camilla. And Bram's first draft, which we think it was later published under the name Dracula's Guest, it was actually set in Styria. And you can see the influences quite clearly of Le Fanu. But also, you'll see in the book Dracula, he refers to his friend Arminius Vanbury, who was the lecturer in foreign languages, myths and legends at Budapest University. And we know that Vanbury and Stoker had met in London, because Bram Stoker was the manager of the Lyceum Theatre, the acting manager, when Sir Henry Irving, the greatest actor of his day, owned it. And they talked, and clearly Bram had developed some ideas, and Bram loved language, and he loved the idea of writing this book about a vampire. Now he spelt it with a W, Wampir. In continental Europe, the Germanic countries, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that would most certainly have been, the W's are pronounced with a V, so it's not vampire, it's vampire. Oh, Bram loved that. So he had this idea of producing a story. It was called The Undead, and the main character was Kant, vampire. It's all right. But on this wet day, I like to imagine, Bram goes to the lending library on the quayside, and he's having a look through the books, and he finds a copy of Wilkinson's Guide to Wallachia, quite an old book, produced in the early 19th century. And in it, we know from his notes, on him from Vode, a mercenary, whose name was Dracula. Everything just now. If you actually try this at home, you can roll the name Dracula around the mouth. It's very satisfying, isn't it? Makes the tongue feel good, like sucking a boiled sweet. If you like boiled sweets, that is. But you're rolling it around, it feels good. It feels kind of sinister, kind of dark. Dracula, not bad. More vampire. But then Bram clearly loves it so much. Just a month before publication, the Undead is gone. And the title, now remember, this is quite a gamble, because people don't know what Dracula is, who he is. So it's a gamble, but it's such a powerful name. It clearly worked for Bram, and it's worked for everybody ever since. That's how it gets its name. But people have wanted to find the origins of Dracula. So they look for this son of the dragon, and they find all of that, which is quite right. Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler. You'll see all of this information. But Bram, ladies and gentlemen, Bram didn't know any of that. There is no mention in any of Dracula's correspondence, in any of his notes for Dracula, and they're pretty darn good. You can go through the whole lot. They're all there. They've been published. There is no mention of Vlad Tepes. In fact, Bram never, ever went to Transylvania. I know, Transylvanian Tourist Authority will not like me for it, but folks, that's the truth. That's the truth. He never, ever went there. There's no Vlad Tepes in the story. And in fact, in the Wilkinson's Guide to Wallachia, Dracula doesn't come off very well. He looks like a bit of a naff mercenary, not the great warrior that Vlad Tepes, this dangerous warrior, this national hero. No, it's just a name. For Bram, it works. It just works. What a name it is.
And, with Bram Stoker, you've done a lot of research on him. How did he become who he was? What was his background? I take it you've done research on him as a person. Because I have
traced his...
Go on, you go first. Go.
Well, I was just going to say, I've traced his family line. He is an Irishman at heart. He was born in the 1840s, and he was educated entirely in Ireland. He and his parents and the lineage of his mother's family are old Ireland, going back generations upon generations. Some of the oldest names in Ireland are associated with his mother's family. But the Stokers themselves, they've only been in Ireland since the army of King William of Orange, when he went over there in the late 17th century. And you'll find the Stokers at that time were soldiers, and they were for several generations. Before they were in the army, generations went back in Northumberland, not far from me, right here, right now. I've traced them back to the town of Morpeth, and that's where the Stoker ancestors were, and there are Stoker descendants still in Morpeth to this day.
Wow, brilliant.
So
And
that's his deepest origins, but I dare say Bram Stoker himself, quite rightly, would identify himself as an Irishman, and a big, strong Irishman who couldn't, but as a kid, he couldn't walk until he was 7 years old. He was a very ill young man, and every time the nursery bell rang, his mother, because the nurse would ring it, he worried his mother would think he was going to die or something. I mean, they weren't mega rich. A lot of middle-class families had a servant in those days, particularly if you had a sickly child. And they were quite a big family, the Stokers. So they had Ellen Crone, who was the beloved family nurse to look after the kids. And Bram's dad was a civil servant at Dublin Castle. And his mum, from this feisty line of Irish history, she was very much a women's rights and rights for everybody, treating everybody right, human rights, an early women's speaker, and she would write on that too. So he comes from quite a wonderful mixed background, but very Irish. Wonderful.
Yeah, very. And with I just wanted to point out Anne. She just wanted to say
Hello,
enjoyed
Anne.
listening and watching. But it's lunchtime where she's in South Carolina, California. Sorry. You guys have a wonderful night. Thank you, Anne, for watching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. So with the Bram Stoker, I know that there's ties with Whitby in England, in the UK, just for people watching overseas. And every year they do they all dress up as vampires. We got the opportunity. We didn't know what was going on, but we actually happened to go to Whitby when they were all dressed up as vampires, and it's great. How did the story get to Whitby then? Because I know a lot of people talk about Bram Stoker, and they have like these big gatherings up on I can't remember the name of the castle now.
Whitby Abbey.
Whitby Abbey. Sarah killed me for that, because she goes on about it all the time. But how did the story, an Irishman, from what he created of Dracula, how did it get to Whitby? Because I know you recently went to Whitby a little while ago, didn't you?
Oh, I've been several times over the years. But what happened, Bram grew up in Ireland. He worked in the civil service, followed his dad's footsteps. But he met Henry Irving when he was on tour, Henry Irving, the great actor. When Irving took on the license for the Lyceum Theatre in London, because Bram not only was a civil servant, civil servants didn't earn an awful lot of money to enable him to go to the theatre all the time. He was a bit of a theatre critic too. Bram also didn't like the way the papers wrote up a lot of the reviews for the plays. So he volunteered to do it free. He'd be a theatre critic, so he got free tickets in exchange for writing up reviews. And one of the actors that really moved him was Henry Irving, probably the actor that really, really touched Bram. And so Bram wrote him brilliant reviews. And when Irving set up his theatre in London, he knew that Bram was very savvy with his figures, very good with his book work, very dedicated, very loyal, and a great admirer of Henry Irving. So Irving brought him over. Bram got married just before he came to, and he became the acting manager of the Lyceum Theatre in London. So it was on the holiday in Whitby, on the advice of George de Maurier. That was Bram's first visit to the place, and he loved it. So when he came to write Dracula, he drew on a number of the notes he had taken. Bram spoke to locals. He also explored the graveyard of St. Mary's. Of course, he visited Whitby Abbey. He described it very eloquently, but some of the locals told the story of a shipwreck, a particularly notable one, because it came on the sands very close to Whitby. And it was a ship called the Dimitri. And on some of the Frank Meadows Sutcliffe photographs, you can actually see the wreck of the Dimitri still on the beach.
Yeah.
Bram took the story of this shipwreck, turned it around a bit, so the ship became known as the Demeter. And the Demeter is the ship that carries Dracula and his boxers of common earth to Great Britain. And the ship, all the crew are horribly murdered. And the ship gets washed up, and a great black dog bounds ashore. Well, that's Count Dracula in dog form. But they managed to get the boxers of common earth off the ship. And this is all set in Whitby. There are also the Count manifests in St Mary's churchyard. It's where when Mina is one side of the river on the West Cliff, she can see Lucy, her friend, being in the clutches of the Count and his red eyes. And so she has to dash from the West Cliff over to the east, this mad dash, and up the steep steps to St Mary's, if you've ever been up there. So these are all the places that Bram would have known. And he probably would have travelled that journey, because although he'd been a very ill young man, he was quite a fit man into his later life, was our Bram. Very good runner, athletics, gymnasium, swimmer. He rescued a man from the Thames when he was manager at the Lyceum. And that's no mean feat, because the currents of the Thames are pretty serious. So Bram would have probably rehearsed that journey from the cliff over to the other and belting up those steps for Mina to rescue Lucy from the clutches of Dracula. So Bram knew the places. He went around the churchyard, and he annotated an awful lot of the gravestones, and he used some of the names in his books, not just Dracula, but other books. He found a name he liked or an inscription that intrigued him. He'd note it down and use it later. So Whitby was a great influence for Bram Stoker. He incorporated it in his story, and he absolutely loved the place. And between London, Whitby, and a place called Port Erroll, which is now known as Cruden Bay, that's up in Scotland, they are the three real main influences for where he created the Dracula story.
Brilliant. And just the book isn't out yet, but it's coming out later this year, isn't it?
Later this year.
Do you know when it is, or is that still up in the air?
Not quite. It will be out ready for Christmas. I think it'll be around about September.
Absolutely. And people can find it, I take it, like on Amazon. Would it be Amazon?
Any good internet bookshop. There is Amazon, but there are others, places like Blackwell's, or if you get in touch with my publishers, Pen and Sword Books, the White Owl imprint of Pen and Sword, they're producing the biography that I've created. It's simply called Bram Stoker, author of Dracula. You won't miss it. There'll be plenty of publicity when it comes out too. But yeah, any good bookshop, if you get the chance, if you can, do try and order it through a real bookshop. I dare you, go and find one. Go to a real bookshop and go and see what else is on the shelves, because we can't know everything, but what you see on the internet, browse those shelves and keep bookshops alive, please.
Brilliant. Jenny's just said definitely looking forward to it. So thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
And did say vampires are cool. So
they're certainly cool. They are the undead.
And Sarah says vampires are sexy and cool. I don't know about the sexy part.
I'll grow my teeth for you, darling. I really will. Watch your neck at Festival of the Unexplained, Sarah. That's all I can say.
Oh, brilliant. Let's have a look. Hi, Anthony from Rath World and Isabella. Thanks for joining. So going on. So Kim's put a question in. How do you keep focused on each book? As you know, I'm writing one, but I keep writing chapters for other book ideas I have. Is it a case of storing them for another time or scrapping the one I'm writing? So what is your advice to Kim?
Okay, Kim, especially for you, never, ever scrap something you've written. particularly nowadays. We don't lose notebooks so easily. We can keep it all on the net, although on our computers. But for goodness sake, get a good external drive, right? In case one day we have the modern wonder that is the blue screen of doom, right? And just regularly back it up. And it doesn't matter, even if you think it's absolute rubbish, make a file for it and just put it in there. Because one day, even if the text doesn't work, the ideas that are in it, or where those ideas take your mind, your thought process, they're all there. And it's far more difficult to recapture that than if you've destroyed it, if you've just zapped it. So yeah, just keep it. There you are, darling. That's a pleasure. Keep those files. And do you know what? I've been collecting stuff and it used to be on hard copy files for all of my life, as long as I can remember. And they became books. Even if I could think, how can I ever put stories of UFOs, ghosts, vampires, horrible murders, crimes and punishments? But then I thought, well, the Victorians used to create almanacs, and I thought of strange events and the years. I thought, well, why don't I create a grim almanac of Norfolk, my home county? And because people at my talks have always loved the darker stories, what they eloquently call the twiddly bits, the little thing you can take away and throw into a conversation. Did you know? Just a little quickie. And I thought, do you know, I can find one of those attached to every single day of the year, just about, without having to knock a square peg into a round hole. So I created Grim Almanac Norfolk. And my publishers, I write for several different ones. This was History Press. And my editor said, oh, I really love that. Could you do some more? I said, oh, yes, I can do Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Lincolnshire. I'd love to do all of East Anglia. And of course, I want to do Jack the Ripper's London. I said, that's great. I said, they said we could make a series of this. I said, that's all right. I'll sell you the rights. And do you know what? They said, oh, yes, put us in touch with your agent. You and I didn't have an agent at the time. So all of those things, all of the things I've never used, all of those stories, all of those lists of executions and the little twiddly bits that were all in those files came together to produce Grim Almanacs. Wow. And then I suddenly found that once I've done East Anglia, there are experts all over Great Britain that have done exactly the same as me, except for their own counties. So it was the first ever series of books. This was in the 1990s and early 2000s that charts the dark history of Britain by county. So and they got all sorts of awards, and I was really chuffed with that. In fact, that was my first ever book award, was actually from Cambridgeshire, for my Grim Almanac of Cambridgeshire. I'm eternally grateful for everybody that voted for the book there. That meant so much to me, and it's something I treasure. Now, the point is, never throw anything away. Put it in your files, but back them up so you never lose them. That's brilliant. The idea.
Jenny's just asked a quick question. We're going back to Bram Stoker quickly. Quick question. How did they come up with the Garlic repels vampires?
Well, it's very interesting that there's a folklore of vampires. One of the greatest influences for Bram Stoker was a female explorer. Her name was Emily Gerard, and she did the real deal. She went through darkest Transylvania, and she wrote an article, and it was for one of the popular magazines of its day called the 19th Century. Mostly it was a sort of gentleman's literary and knowledge magazine, you know, those who are well-read and sort of scientific, you know. But Emily Gerard is in there. And there were other ladies too. But she was a bit of a groundbreaker. And in Transylvanian superstitions, Bram really liked that. He had a copy of that. That's well marked in his notes. But it also inspired him to think and sort of morph other traditions. So you have the ancient true traditions. For example, here's a good one. Nosferatu. Now everybody thinks that Nosferatu is another word for a vampire. But it actually is it translates as a creature of the night. So this is not just the vampire, this is the werewolf, the night walker, the stalker, the creatures of the night. So he adapted some of the folk tales and the legends accordingly. In the European folklore, particularly the garlic flower and the garlic clove under the tongue repels the vampire. It's very strong smelling, isn't it? I love garlic. I'll never get pestered by a vampire. But if you don't like it, you can smell it 10 foot away. So it's a strong smell. It can be described as repellent. And so strong smells in even in English tradition, for example, if you wanted to dispel the miasma of illness, you would burn herbs in the past to purify the air. That's what they thought that would, it would get into the rafters and get rid of the cholera that's lurking around there. So in that kind of spirit of pungent, clean smells, sweet smells or powerful smells, dispelling, that's where the garlic clove and the garlic flowers comes from. So it's a little bit of Gerard, it's a little bit of folk tradition, and quite a lot of Bram.
I love it. That's brilliant. The way you've just explained it as well is absolutely brilliant. So, we've talked about a lot of the history stuff that you've done, but you've also, taken a step into the paranormal world. You've been a guest historian on Help My House is Haunted and Celebrity Help My House is Haunted. And you've also been on Most Haunted. How did that come about? And what was your take when they first approached you about it? Like from going from history and then into the paranormal, what was your sort of take at first?
Well, growing up as I did in a rural county, you're actually surrounded by superstition, folklore, and legends of ghosts. In fact, if you didn't have some interest or knowledge of folk legends and stories, having grown up in the countryside, I'd think that was odd rather than being something that very few people enjoyed. So I've always been interested. I've always loved thrills and chills. A ghost story that doesn't give you nightmares, but just gives you a little shiver, like the tales of Jack the Ripper or anything else. That little shiver, not terror. Although Jack was terrifying in his day. So with that kind of spirit, it's always been with me. I've always I've been investigating paranormal phenomena since the late 1980s. When were you born, Nando?
85.
You were 4 years old when I staged my first ever formal ghost hunt. You were 4.
Wow.
Well, I was at college, and it wasn't anything too great, I have to say, as the equipment was very out of date. Well, it was the latest thing in my day, but by modern comparison. So I've always had an interest. I loved books by people like Peter Haney. I used to enjoy when I was a kid, but above all, it was the Usborne Book of Ghosts, a little bit of Harry Price, Wentworth Day, or the... It was just magical for me. It's always been not a guilty pleasure. It has been a pleasure because partly it was to try and get over my fear. I was really scared by ghost stories. So come on, be a big boy about it. Go and investigate it. Get a handle on it. What's real? What's not? What's a load of rubbish? Where's the truth in it? Where's the history in the story? Has it got a history? Is there a haunted history?
Yeah.
So it's always been with me. So when I had finished at university and I was at a military museum in Norfolk, it was Most Haunted was, I don't think it was even on terrestrial TV. It was on something crazy like UK Living as a subscription or satellite thing.
Yeah.
But one of the museum crew was watching it and enjoyed it. And I said, well, why don't we contact them? Because the museum was certainly experiencing Paranormal Activity. So it was great to have them along. But then a few years later, when Help My House is Haunted started, they always try and find a different historian wherever they go. And they'd just come across one of my Grim Almanacs. And I got to know the team there, and we just clicked. And it's not just wonderful Jane and Barry, and in the first series it was that I worked with them, it was Chris Fleming, but also with Ian Lawman. And we have a moustache off, Ian Lawman and I. That's why he started waxing
is there a bit of contest between who's got the best moustache out of the two of you? Because he's got the twizzle going on with the moustache as well, hasn't he? So I could bet.
Dead right. It was when I got to know Jane. She was very new to the series, and we just clicked. Because Jane is Jane, and they all are. There's no pretenses, and I was impressed with how honest that series is, but also the production team that you don't see, or the ones you glimpse on the fringes of the shots. Particularly director Ben. What a lovely, lovely man, and he's a Norfolk man too. I played for North Walsham Rugby. He played for down this way as well. So there's an awful lot of links, a lot of kind of team spirit, and so every series since I've helped them with research. But because every episode you've got to have a different historian, I only appear on one episode per series. But believe you me, the spirit of Neil Storey is often with them. And what a lovely, lovely team it is. It's a pleasure. And they respect history. They don't make stories fit. And how Ian Lawman knows some of those stories I've dug up, they're really obscure. They're not in my books. They've said, we're going here. Can you tell us about that? I just do the research, and I just don't know. The man's clearly got a gift. We talk, yes, if I'm on set, but I don't tell him anything. He doesn't know anything until, and Jane and I, we will be at a separate location. We do the shoot, and then they go and do Ian doesn't know.
So it is as it is, as it's seen on TV. He doesn't get any info, and it is literally, it's fed back to him after he does his walk around and after they've done the investigation, which is great. And with you're talking about the research, when you're asked to, look at a case and go and find out research, what goes into that? What kind of things do you, where do you get your information from?
Yeah. Well, it's a combination. I mean, I've got archives going back 40 years, near enough, that I've been collecting about murders, anomalous things. You see, ladies and gentlemen, not every newspaper is on the internet yet. And when I started, I had to sit my bum down in a library and go through a whirly thing like that.
Oh, they screen it. Is it the ones that just wish the screens up?
Yeah. And I had to do that to do my research. People take so much for granted now, and there's still newspapers that are not online. So I've got microfilm copies, I've got hard copies, I've got scrapbooks, a host of material, plus the online searches, of course. And it's a wonderful, I love it. I love the challenge of, can you imagine this? Somebody says to you, you're a historian, you're a paranormal researcher, we've got a haunted house, great, but it's a 1970s house on a pretty standard estate, and we're haunted as hell. Where do you go with that one? So you've got to look at the land. You've got to, what does that house stand on? What was there before? What are the legends of that area? Then that's where it starts to get interesting. And not so long ago, one of the researchers on Help My House is Haunted, she said, look, we throw you all sorts. They said, how do you do it? Well, I said, well, look, I think we all believe to a certain degree in ghosts, or a sense of place haunting. There are reasons why hauntings take place. And it's often because something dramatic or horrible has happened there. So it's not surprising if you start digging back in a genuinely haunted property that, lo and behold, something quite dramatic and awful has happened there.
Wow. It's just amazing because, you pick up the history, and then when you watch on TV, you get like the parts that you've played in it and telling the history of what they found. But in a way, Ian's already uncovered some of the stuff that you've already said, and it's just great. And where you've confirmed the way that he doesn't get anything is absolutely amazing.
How he put, the celebrity edition, which is out on Discovery Plus, that'll be coming out on terrestrial soon. It's an incredible story where you find this case of murder where two women it's a horrible murder on a property nearby. It wasn't on the actual house where it took place, but the haunting connects to these women, to that dark story, to the death of a baby. And
yeah, I know which one you're on about.
And Ian's walked in and he's hearing the cries of a baby. He's here. No, it could have been anything. And he's hearing the spirits of these women. They're in contact with them. They've got a trigger object. And I took a razor blade. That was quite fun. Walking into a pub with a razor blade in my pocket to meet Jane. I did check with her before. I said, Jane, I'm going to be producing a blade. Do you have a blade phobia? And we're lucky enough to know each other beyond the show now. We correspond via the old Facebook and stuff. But I didn't want to sort of say, oh, look at this, Jane.
Yeah, throw it back like, whoa.
But we were in a very, very quiet area. And she's just great. I consider it, it's a privilege to work with such talented and lovely, lovely people. And I really, really mean that. It is a privilege to work with them. And I think it comes through that the integrity of these shows with the people who watch it. I think that you can, if anybody ever meets Ian Lorman or Jane or Barry, they all are the people you see on TV.
Yeah. Sarah had the great. We had Barry Guy on the podcast. Sarah and our teammate Jojo, and they couldn't believe the way he is on screen. He is that person. And what was lovely about Barry is that even though he was quite busy, he was happy to stay on and have a chat with them afterwards, like just like a general chat. And it was absolutely great. He is what he is on TV. He is a nice guy, which was great. But going back to you, so with things coming up, with things going on with you, I know one of the things that is coming up for you in September is the Festival of the Unexplained.
Hey,
which you were a guest speaker last year, and you're actually returning as a guest speaker this year. And there's some great guests, as you can see from the lineup on the screen there, everyone. What can you tell us a little bit about what you've got planned for this year's speak that you're going to be doing?
Absolutely. Well, when he's in the UK, it's very difficult to keep dear old Dave Schrader and I apart. It's like splitting up a couple of good buddies. He's a magical guy. If you've ever seen the Holzer Files, he is the real deal. I love the guy to bits. He gave me my big break in America, so it's going to be great to have Dave in the UK. It's lovely. Penny Griffiths Morgan, Daniel Class, Rob Thompson. All great friends. Lovely people. So it's a privilege to be there again. This year I wrote a book called The Blackout Murders. It's about homicide in World War II. And one of the darkest tales of all that's fascinated me for years, it's known as the Lower Quinton witchcraft murder. Now, strictly speaking, where the murder took place, it was actually Upper Quinton. This is in Warwickshire. But the focus of the story is in this lovely rural village. If you imagine, it's timber frames, it's thatch, beautiful, idyllic, chocolate box cover A man called Charles Walton. He's been a widower for a lot of years. His niece is his kind of housekeeper. He's in his 70s. And on St. Valentine's Day in 1945, just, months before the end of the Second World War, when his niece got the old boy's dinner ready, he's not home. No, he was an old boy, a creature of habit. He would always be home. There must have been something wrong. So she goes into the fields. He used to do little odd jobs in the farm where he'd worked for most of his life. They couldn't find him. And so as the sun was setting and people were drawing their blackout curtains, even at that time, they found the farmer. Where's he been working? Come and show us. And they found Charlie, corner of the field. He was laying down and clothes were in disarray. And Charlie had been pinned to the ground with his pitchfork that he'd been used for hedging through the neck.
Wow.
And then the handle of the pitchfork, long handle, had been bent back and tucked into the hedgerow, so it absolutely pulled his hedge back. They then got hold of his hedge slashing tool and slashed his throat. So it was wide open. Old boy didn't stand a chance. It was horrific. But locals started to talk, and they knew Long Compton, not a million miles away from there was a book on Warwickshire that had been written, turn of the century, very popular book on a lot of people's shelves, talked about how they just, and it's a bit of folk knowledge, like in Transylvania, they all know how to stake a vampire out there. They all know how to kill a witch in this part of rural Warwickshire, and you have to stab her with a pitchfork. Long Compton, a woman was stabbed in the leg with a pitchfork and it killed her. Now, the man that did that, he was put down for murder, but he got sent away because he was just judged as insane. But the story lingered. And the story that got magnified about Charlie, maybe a few people had talked about him over the years. They thought that maybe he was a bit of a witch. And that the story that got around was that he'd cursed the land. That's what was put about. Whether that was true or not, we don't know. It's certainly been enlarged over the years. So the local police, they couldn't find any real leads. The rumours were out there. There was talk of cattle had died and the crops haven't been that good. And old Charlie, he was meant to be charming toads and talking to birds. And what's all that about? And locals were starting to shut doors, saying, well, he's been dead a month. He's gone buried. Didn't seem to be too much concern about who his killer was. So Scotland Yard was brought in. Now, the greatest Scotland Yard detective, the most famous of his day, was Robert, known to most as Bob in the job, Fabian. Fabian of the Yard. There was even a TV series called Fabian of the Yard. But the one case, even Fabian of the Yard could not solve, was the Quinton witchcraft murder. People started shutting doors on him. It was as if the whole village just clammed up and didn't want to know. And if you go to Quinton now, unless you've got an in with the locals, they don't want to know. They say things like, everybody involved, they're all dead now. Even Charlie Walton's grave doesn't have a headstone on it. They are very, very sensitive about this murder even today. And I think that's a terrible thing, because his murderer got away with it. And I think in my investigations, I didn't uncover it personally. One of the wonderful crime historians of the 1970s was Richard Whittington Egan. And if you love your old books, he wrote things like that. He was the editor of the Weekend Book of Ghosts and Horror, which was one of my early inspirations. He wrote so well. He was really good, a true gentleman. And Richard had the chance to interview Bob Fabian, and he asked the question. Now, Bob, in those days, was worried about libel and pointing the finger at the person he believed was the killer of Charles Walton.
Wow.
Well, time's marched on, and as they say in Lower Quinton, they're all dead now. So I name that person in my book. I'm not the first, others have mooted him around, but I think I found one or two extra little bits of evidence that are quite compelling, that suggest even more that this individual, this man, is the murderer of Charlie Walton.
Wow. And that's going to be amazing to hear you speak about that at the, because I actually get to go this year. Last year I missed out. So, so Sarah wanted to go back this year. So we're going to be there, and I'm really looking forward to I'm looking forward to seeing everyone, to be honest.
Absolutely right.
You know, it's going to be really exciting. And then, as we said, we're going to have a couple of cheeky whiskies and show people how dance works on the dance floor.
There could be, with my brand new hip fully recovered by that time, and there could be a few dance-offs going on, to say the least. That's what I'm saying.
You'll be doing somersaults. You'll be doing somersaults.
I'm not going to over-promise and under-deliver. That's not going to happen, all right?
I think what will end up happening, we'll just sit in the corner with a couple of whiskies and just enjoy the moment and just watch everyone.
There will be the dance, but no somersaults.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to it. We'll have a dance off. Just to quickly mention, hi Scott. Hi guys from Ghost Trackers UK. Thank you for joining. So yeah, it's going to be great to see you in action at the Festival of the Unexplained. Apart from that, what else do you have going on? Are there any other projects that you're...
There might be a project involving you.
Yes, I believe there is.
That you've been very, very good, because we've been keeping this very much under our hats. We can't say too much about it, but inspired by my friend Dave Schrader and his team in America, revisiting the Holzer files. Well, I've found quite a lot of files of you relating to UK UFO investigations in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. Now, these are not top secret government files, although some of these men were ex-military, and some of them were compiled during World War II by serving members of the armed forces. But there were quite a lot of UFO research groups in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And so I'm reinvestigating some of their cases and some of their sightings. And some people know all about this. They say, oh, we know all about those, and that's fine. But for many people, one of the greatest UFO portals of England has been almost forgotten. And Nando and the gang, we're going to go and have a little bit of investigation over in Warminster. See what we can see.
Yes, we're looking forward to that, and there's a lot, lot to look forward to, and we're excited to be able to do some work with you. That's going to be amazing to, in a way, tag along and have some fun with you and see what happens.
We're going to make really a team exciting.
Yeah, and we're gonna it's gonna be fun. I can see us having a real good time. And then what we've already discussed, after everything has been done, and Neil we're going to do a follow-up show to talk about what we've done together and what the outcome of it, or something to really look forward to in the future, guys. And we're really excited to. We were honoured when you asked us to, join you on this project. So look to that. And
what really touched me about the stories. Oh, well, thank you. But the point was, you see, you saw that this sort of UFO phenomena of the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s. These were really the first. We've got lots of paranormal groups now, but that was a phenomenon in its day, was the UFO research groups. And it'd be nice to recapture some of that atmosphere. It wasn't solo people. Of course, you'll always get people on their own, but people getting together to share the road trip, to share the journey, the excitement of finding the right place. And thanks to these lovely reports and witness statements and works by authors like people like Arthur Shuttlewood, who was the local reporter in Warminster back in the day. It's well charted where these locations were. They're still accessible. And to be able to stand on those same spots, and we shall see what we will see, because I've never been. You've never been. It's not far from you.
We've never been either. And some of the stories that you told us, we've never actually heard of, because after we spoke on the phone, me and Sarah, we sat in front of the TV and we Googled it, we YouTubed it, and we started listening to the stories and started writing notes, so we sort of can understand. So, yeah, like we said, absolutely looking forward to doing that with you. It's going to be great. Kim's just put a note in there. Me and the team will be there too. So I think Kim's going to be at the Festival of the Unexplained. So that'll be great.
Kim, you're more than welcome, my darling. It'd be lovely to see you anytime. That would be brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Jenny's just put, I'm so jealous. I'm booking a flight now. So
it'd be lovely to see you, Jenny.
And she's just said, absolutely fantastic show as always. Thank you, Jen. It means a lot. Neil, it's been a pleasure for me to get to speak to you, and find out, the history side of things. Thank you for sharing what you've got coming up as well.
You're a lovely man, Nando.
Thank you. As mentioned, though, if you do want to see Neil at the Festival of the Unexplained, I do believe there's some day tickets still available, and all the other guests that they've got lined up. They've got a great weekend planned. Head over to festivaloftheunexplained.co.uk, or you can find them on Facebook. Great team, Karen, Rachel, Nikki. They've got a great team. So
Gemma.
definitely get in touch if you want to attend. It's, by what I was told, last year was an absolute hit, and this year is going to be even better because, as we said, me and Neil are going to do a dance off. So let's see who wins. But we look forward to seeing your book come out on sale. Guys, as Neil said, do head, if you're interested, have a look at his new book coming out. And again, look out for us in the future, because I'm sure we're going to do a follow-up with Neil, especially with the work that we're looking at doing. But for now, I just want to thank you so much, Neil, for being part of the show. So soon after your hip replacement as well. It was funny, guys. Me and Neil have been talking over the last few days, last week, and I was like, Neil, how you doing? Do this. We were just talking in general, like friends, and we were saying about taking it easy. And I said, do you think that you'll be happy once you're all sorted, come back on the show and have a chat with me? And he was like, yeah, how's next week for you? And I'll be honest, I didn't expect you to be next week, because I know you're still recovering. So I just want to, I really am, honoured that you would come on so quickly.
It's part of my recovery. I've got to take it steady, though. I'll probably be asleep most of tomorrow now.
Bill's just said, I hope you stream the dance off.
Damn right. And the after party bubble tub, with Rob Thompson. Yeah, you and me, Nando. We're there. Job done.
That's it. That's if I can still walk.
That's mano on mano.
Brilliant. But thank you so much for joining us, Neil. Thank you for everyone that's joined in, and welcome Neil to the show and got involved. It's been absolutely great to talk to you again, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot more to talk about going forward, seeing you and doing some stuff with you. But for now, I'll let you go. Have a great rest of your evening, and we'll be in touch real soon. But thank you, Neil, again, for being part of the show tonight.
Lovely to be with you. Love to all, and thank you to everybody that sent me such kind messages and prayers to help me heal so well. Bless you all. Thank you, my friends.
See you later, Neil.
Good night.
We'll speak to you in a bit. What a great show, everyone. Again, thank you for joining in. Neil, absolutely great guy to speak to. Lots of fun. If you do want to check out Neil, there's a lot of interviews that he's taken part on YouTube. So definitely go over there and check that out. Just a bit about Portal to the Paranormal. So just to let you know, Portal to the Paranormal have our investigation on the 6th of May. That is part of the Global Ghost Hunt. So as a lot of you may have seen, we have signed up to be part of Global Ghost Hunt. It is a global event over 14 days in May, where there's going to be teams from around the world that are going to be streaming their live investigations. As mentioned, we will be doing ours on the 6th of May at Merchiston Hall. So definitely go over to Global Ghost Hunt and check that out with all the other teams. We have our main event for everyone in the UK. If they want to join, we're going back to Fort Whitley at the end of May. As always, you can check out our website, www.portaltotheparanormal.co.uk. If you want to come and join and investigate the tunnels with us in Portsmouth, please do. But for now, one more thing I will mention. Next Monday, we have another show prepared. We have the lads from the Patrol Paranormal, Rob and Rob, will be joining me next week. So do join us for that as well. But again, I just want to thank everyone for joining in. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see you soon. But for now, bye.